I am Arya. I am 28 years old. The night that everything shattered began as nothing more than a family dinner, the kind of suffocating gathering that always left me hollow. The air smelled of roasted lamb and over-seasoned potatoes, the kind of food my mother insisted was tradition, though none of us ever enjoyed it. Candles flickered across the polished mahogany table, shadows stretching like claws against the walls. We all sat there, my parents, my younger sister, my aunt, a cousin or two, wearing the masks we had perfected for years. Pretending closeness, feigning warmth, forcing laughter at empty stories that never meant anything. But beneath that fragile surface was tension, years of unspoken resentment, a web of grudges that wound tighter with every clink of a glass. When dessert came, silence draped itself across the table like a thick veil, and then my mother, always the center of cruelty, always the queen of barbed remarks, leaned forward, lips curling in disdain, and whispered the words that cracked the illusion. She said, "I wish she'd never been born." Her voice was quiet, almost playful, but sharp enough to pierce bone. The others laughed, nervous, complicit, unwilling to confront her venom. The laughter echoed, bouncing off the walls, amplifying the humiliation. My chest burned as though set ablaze, my skin prickled, my stomach churned, yet I placed my fork down carefully, deliberately, because I refused to let her see me crumble. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but my smile was steady, controlled, almost serene. And then, with a calmness that frightened even me, I answered her with a single line, words that sliced through the room with surgical precision, silencing every voice at the table. The air shifted, the laughter died, and the weight of truth pressed down so heavily that even she, the woman who thrived on domination, found herself speechless. That was the moment I reclaimed power, the moment I chose not to drown in her cruelty but to rise from it. I stood, collected my coat, and walked away, leaving behind their frozen faces and brittle silence, knowing this night was only the beginning of a reckoning they never saw coming. I left the house that night with the winter wind clawing at my cheeks, the cold slicing through my thin coat, but none of it compared to the chill burning in my veins. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, the sound rhythmic, like the pounding of war drums that marked the start of something inevitable. Each stride carried me further from that table, from the suffocating walls that had imprisoned me my entire life, yet deeper into the storm I had just unleashed. My mother's words replayed in my mind, not as wounds but as fuel, her voice etched in acid against my bones. 4 years, I had swallowed her insults, endured her dismissals, absorbed her manipulations like a sponge desperate for approval that never came. Every belittling comment, every time she made me feel invisible, every moment she chose my sister over me, it had stacked, one insult over another, forming a mountain of rage I had buried in silence. But tonight was different. Tonight, something inside me fractured, not in weakness but in transformation. I could feel the shift in my body, the awakening of a fire that could no longer be smothered. As I walked, the city loomed around me, streetlights casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to whisper promises of vengeance. My breath hung in the air like smoke, my hands trembled, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. I thought about their laughter, the way my father glanced away, unwilling to confront the cruelty, the way my sister smirked as if my pain was entertainment. I thought about how they had all conspired, silently, for years, choosing comfort over truth, complicity over courage. And I knew then that I couldn't just walk away and let the cycle continue. They needed to see me, not as the girl they ridiculed, not as the scapegoat they could discard at will, but as something far more dangerous, the one who remembered everything, the one who would turn their laughter into screams. That night I didn't go home. I wandered the city until dawn painted the sky with ash and fire, and in that sleepless haze I began to plan, not out of impulse, but out of necessity. Because sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you need to strike back so hard that the echoes of your revenge are impossible to ignore. By morning, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, but beneath it pulsed clarity sharper than any blade. I sat in a quiet cafe, its windows fogged from the heat of brewing coffee, watching strangers rush through their lives, unaware of the storm I was preparing to summon. A notebook lay open in front of me, its blank pages daring me to etch the future I envisioned, a future where I would no longer be their victim but their undoing. My pen moved as if guided by something greater than myself, sketching names, moments, memories that had scarred me, each one a reminder of how far their cruelty reached. I wrote down my mother's endless cutting remarks, my father's cowardly silence, my sister's smirks that delighted in my pain. Each entry felt like an incision, precise and deliberate, until the page was filled with an anatomy of betrayal. For years, they had convinced me I was weak, that I didn't deserve love, that my very existence was an inconvenience. But as the words flowed, I realized I held the power of memory, and memory was a weapon. Because unlike them, I never forgot. My strategy wasn't just about anger, it was about justice. I needed to unravel their carefully woven facade of perfection, expose the darkness they cloaked in respectability. I thought about my mother's pristine reputation among her friends, her obsession with appearances, the way she would rather die than let the world glimpse her rot. I thought about my father's job, his desperate need for respect from colleagues who idolized his supposed integrity. And my sister, always painted as the golden child, adored by neighbors, doted upon as the flawless daughter. They had built their fortress out of lies, and I was the only one who knew every crack in the foundation. The plan wasn't about violence, it was about truth, the kind of truth that burns brighter than any flame. I would become their mirror, forcing them to confront the reflection they had spent years denying. As I sipped the bitter coffee that morning, I realized revenge wasn't born in anger. It was born in silence, in patience, in the meticulous gathering of everything they hoped would stay hidden. And I swore to myself, as the sun broke through the clouds and painted the streets gold, that by the time I was finished, their laughter would never echo again. Days turned into weeks, and each sunrise brought me closer to the storm I had envisioned in that cafe. I moved carefully, like a hunter circling prey, masking my intentions with politeness while sharpening the edges of truth behind closed doors. I gathered evidence not in haste, but with the precision of someone who knew the smallest detail could unravel an empire of lies. From my mother's credit card bills that revealed secret purchases she had hidden from my father, to the emails where she whispered venom about her friends, the woman who claimed moral superiority was nothing more than a hypocrite rotting beneath her mask. I uncovered my father's indiscretions, quiet payments to silence mistakes, his so-called integrity built on fragile foundations. And my sister, the one worshipped as flawless, had debts she buried, affairs she covered, betrayals that painted her as far from perfect. Piece by piece, I stacked their secrets like kindling, each discovery a spark that promised to blaze. Yet as I collected their sins, I found my resolve hardening not into hatred but into something purer, clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl crushed under their shadows. I was the architect of their reckoning. Nights were the hardest, lying awake in silence as my mind replayed the moment at the dinner table, my mother's words slicing through me like glass, the other's laughter stabbing deeper than knives. Those echoes kept me awake, but they also kept me moving forward, reminding me why none of this could be abandoned. I imagined their faces when truth flooded their carefully constructed world, the panic in their eyes, the realization that the daughter they dismissed as powerless had become their undoing. And even as doubt whispered in the corners of my mind, asking if I was going too far, if I was becoming the monster they had painted me to be, I silenced it with the knowledge that survival demanded more than silence. It demanded justice. And justice, I decided, would arrive not with fury but with precision. Soon, their empire of lies would collapse, not by my hands alone, but by the weight of their own sins dragged into the light. The night of reckoning came not with thunder, but with a quiet hum of anticipation. I stood in the back of the community hall, heart steady, watching as neighbors, colleagues, friends, all the people who worshipped my family's illusion, gathered for the charity gala my mother had orchestrated to display her perfection. Candles flickered against glass walls, laughter bubbled through the air, violins sang sweet melodies, and the stage was set exactly as I needed it to be. When my mother stepped forward, pearls gleaming on her neck, eyes glittering with the pride of a woman convinced she owned the room, I pressed the button in my pocket. The projector behind her screen flickered, and instead of her carefully edited slideshow of family smiles, the truth bled across the canvas. Images of her secret letters, receipts of betrayals, Her venomous words about those sitting in the audience. It unfolded in silence sharp enough to cut bone. Gasps filled the room, whispers spread like wildfire, and my mother's voice broke into stutters as she clawed at excuses. Then came my father's truths, financial records, messages that stripped away his facade of integrity, and his shoulders collapsed under the weight of exposure. Finally, my sister's hidden affairs, her debts, her broken promises, all illuminated in ruthless clarity. The hall erupted, the once adoring crowd recoiling as my family's empire turned to ash before their eyes. And I stood there, unseen in the shadows, not as their daughter but as the architect of their ruin. For once, there was no laughter at my expense, no mocking glances, no dismissal of my existence. Only silence, heavy and absolute, as their world collapsed. Walking out into the night air, I inhaled deeply, the chill filling my lungs like liberation. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't invisible. I had carved justice from the lies that tried to erase me. And as the stars burned above, I knew this was only the beginning of a life built on my own terms, free from their chains. If you love the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Your support fuels more amazing stories like this.